Nickelodeon, your TV network. Nickelodeon, the place for kids. Nickelodeon.
Nick.
Nickelodeon.
Nick.
Nickelodeon.
This video is brought to you by Patreon. Patreon. Never leave home without it. I've referred to the Cy Schneider years of Nickelodeon as PBS You Pay For, which is going to become even more and more apt as time moves on, but Nickelodeon and the public broadcasting service have had a very under-discussed relationship over the years. PBS was the closest thing Nickelodeon had to a model to build off of, the only other place with educational, non-commercial children's programming. The staff of Nickelodeon's first show, Pinwheel, was packed with alumni from the Electric Company, arguably the most successful 70s PBS show, and the channel was developed with the help of Dr. Vivian Horner, who was the Electric Company's director of research. Nickelodeon would tap into PBS resources over the decades. Before the implementation of Nickelodeon Studios at Universal Studios Florida, the channel filmed a lot of its early game shows, including Double Dare, at the studios of Philadelphia's PBS affiliate WHYY-TV. Then there was Noggin, a Nickelodeon spin-off channel that was a joint venture between Viacom and the Children's Television Workshop, mixing in old Nick Jr. shows with Sesame Street. And of course, there were the times where Nickelodeon just straight up got the broadcast rights to older PBS programming, which happened a lot more often than I think people realize. And that began in 1981. Nickelodeon would air 2 canceled PBS shows this year, both from the 70s and both largely forgotten in our general popular culture, but otherwise both very different programs. Today's subject is Studio C.
How would you feel if you saw your favorite model plane crash to the ground?
What advice does Dizzy Gillespie have for kids who want to play the trumpet?
How can you have a pen pal without ever writing a letter?
I'm Jane Adair. We're going to find out the answers to these questions and more, right here at Studio C.
Originally broadcast on PBS for 2 seasons between 1977 and 1979, Studio C's main selling point was not just that it was child-focused, but that it was child-created. A magazine show that featured short documentaries, interviews, poetry readings, and whatever else tickles the fancy. Each segment involved children, usually between the ages of 9 and 12, either as the subject matter, the interviewer talking to the interviewee, or in the case of the poetry readings, the one who wrote the poems.
If these blues would let me, God knows I would smile. If these blues would let me, I would smile, smile, smile. Instead, I'm crying, 'cause I'm Miss Bluesy's blues child. You my moon, baby. You my wishing star. You my moon, baby. You my wishing star. I would try to catch you, but you're gone so very far. Now my days are lonely, and nighttime drives me wild. Now my days are lonely, and nighttime drives me wild. In my heart I'm crying, 'cause I'm Miss Bluesy's blue child.
Poetry Power from Shirley Hilliard, Orangeburg, South Carolina.
Studio C was the brainchild of Jane Adair and produced by South Carolina Educational Television, or ETV, the governing body of every one of the state's licensed PBS stations. In 1976, Adair and ETV sent out classifieds to local community papers to try and drum up interesting stories that might be featured on the program. For example, this one from the Montana Schools paper. A new public broadcasting service children's program called Studio C might visit you. Beginning January 1st, Studio C will send traveling video crews around the nation to produce location features about kids, their activities, and their interests. Jane Adair, producer, said, "We are not looking for stars, just for the average kid who has a special interest and the perseverance to develop it." And presumably this was enough to get content for their first season. Once the show started airing, bumpers at the end of each episode would ask kids to mail in their ideas.
Did you know that all the poems and cartoons on Studio C are done by kids? We want your ideas too. Send them to Studio C, SC, ETV, Columbia, South Carolina, 29250. Take these letters to Studio C.
And yeah, they totally found some interesting kids to spotlight. Kids who scuba dive, kids who box, kids who do movie stunts and get set on fire and thrown off a building. Oh my God!
Step up. That's good. Let me ride you. Alrighty, let me let go for a second. Go!
Okay. You other kids can go home. Nobody's topping that. Actually, this one is kind of sad. This is Reed Rondell, a young stunt actor from a family of stunt actors who died tragically in a helicopter accident on the set of Airwolf in 1985 at the age of 22. Of what little footage of this show is available, I was only able to scrounge up 2 complete episodes and some select clips. I'm glad that this spotlight of a young talent taken for its time still exists. One of the things that helped Adair pull this show off was the continued advancements in video, a format that was becoming cheaper and easier to use with every passing year. Studio C was the first non-news television show to take U-matic 3/4-inch video equipment out of the studios and into the field, taking advantage of its portability to take road trips across the United States without having to lug heavy machinery. In fact, the show was proud of its production side, often pulling aside the curtain and letting the production spill into the show itself. It wasn't uncommon to see camera equipment or boom mic operators in the shot. Some episodes opened with Jane Adair in the editing booth. We see the crew over the closing credits, and the very final episode of the show was a behind-the-scenes look that got into the nitty-gritty.
Okay. It's always like this with any TV production. Too little time and too much to do. And there's a lot happening all at once to make a Studio C show. Jane and Cecily are planning new shows, while a crew is out on location taping. 3 directors will be editing these features together, and they'll be sent to PBS in Washington, D.C. From there, they'll be broadcast to public television stations near you and transmitted to your very own television set.
If there's one type of hobby this show encouraged, it was videography. The one episode of the show you can find on YouTube was edited by a guy inspired by all this behind-the-scenes tech stuff, and ended up putting annotations with additional technical information on it. Which, my technical learning side is like, oh, neat, these are interesting facts. While my film preservation side is all, oh, come on, can you upload it untampered? Please? Please? Thanks to Studio C and its use of video, Jane Adair was recognized as part of a movement of women entering the field of video production in a 1977 issue of Videoscope, where she argued more for the practical side of the technology rather than the artistic side. Video is now out of the stage where you can call yourself experimenting with video and use that as an excuse. We want Studio C to be good video, with the highest production techniques that we can possibly put into it, both audio and video. In essence, no fuss television. Point and shoot and let the subjects carry the work. This was a show run by young professionals with little experience trying to make good children's television. Cecily Truitt, who would later go on to help create Reading Rainbow, was a production assistant on Studio C and described her experience with the show not unlike the experience of other young entrepreneurs. The people who were programming in public TV had a sense of startup, a sense of excitement, a sense of mission, a sense of being radical outlaws for quality and for good and for mission-based programming, and intellectual and tremendous creative freedom to bring the passion of quality and content and craft to the audience. And that was a wonderful time. A wonderful time. None of us knew what was happening then, but we were creating an educational environment. You just lived and breathed shows like this. You worked 18 hours a day and had a ball. We just knew that this was going to be the best job in TV we would ever have in our careers. Yeah, who needs unions when you can have energetic young people who don't know better working 18 hours a day out of vans and motel rooms? Man, I hope nobody on this show is working for exposure. Oh wait, the kids!
Trips like this have gotten to be pretty routine for Studio C. That's because everything we do, from alligator safaris to hot air ballooning, is produced on location with portable video. The kids we work with, like Chris and George here, actually become Studio C's production assistants when we're out on location. They help plan the taping and move the equipment around. That's because we have to catch the action right as it happens to make Studio C as lively and unpredictable as we possibly can.
I seriously doubt they were paying the kids that they would recruit for these productions. On one hand, if I was 10 and had the opportunity to work on a television program, I would jump at the chance. On the other hand, free child labor. I guess I can't really begrudge this production. Nothing bad happened, at least nothing reported, but it does strike me as a rather unprofessional endeavor. Which I suppose is enough dancing around the question of whether or not Studio C was actual good television. I imagine participating in Studio C would have been a childhood highlight, and clearly the show's focus on its technical side inspired one kid to get into the field. But actually watching Studio C is a bit of a chore. There are two main problems with Studio C. One is that it's slow. It has a meandering pace that allows for a lot of dead air. The usual style is to have extended shots of simple actions and then every 10 seconds or so give us a short soundbite from one of the kids. Here's a bit from the scuba diving piece.
When I see a beautiful fish and I want to chase after it, you just feel like, why does he run away from me? You know, I'm not going to hurt him. But if you swim real slow and kind of put your hand out, sometimes you feel that they might trust you, you know? But then it comes to you that you are an outsider.
In this ocean out here, there are not many dangers that can really hurt people. It's usually from their own mistakes, you know, from their own carelessness.
And that's not inherently a bad thing. When the slow pace is combined with the underwater visuals and the music that sounds like it belongs from a Sonic the Hedgehog water level, it does have a sort of meditative charm. But not every segment is this visually interesting, and it gets a whole lot worse when you add in the show's second problem, which was that its presentation is put solely on the shoulders of these kids. And except for that stunt kid, these are not show business children. These are not child actors. They're not the Zoom kids. They're your average Bob and Betty being asked to step in front of the camera for the first time and carry a TV show all by themselves. Again, probably the best day Bob and Betty ever had. I wouldn't take that away from them. But thoughts meander, voices stutter. It's not a high quality presentation. And when you combine that with a slow editing style, you end up with a show that's so lethargic that it might as well have rigor mortis. The point of this show was to highlight kids who have interesting things in their lives, but it shouldn't have to be their responsibility to make interesting television. Sure, it's neat that Jude is neighbors with Rick Baker, but Jude is not a professional interviewer. They don't know how to make this interesting television, and having to sit through 9 minutes of this because you don't know how to trim the fat off in your editing room makes what should be a fun piece on movie makeup as tedious as going to the DMV.
Rick, what are you doing?
This is just a rubber arm, Judd. See?
This is why so many kids shows have charismatic adult hosts like Fred Newman, to be able to express thoughts clearly, to be actually entertaining, to manage the children around them, and to keep the pace moving. That's why the best part of the show is the poetry readings, with actual adults performing and giving life to the writing of children. That's cool, and maybe inspired Nickelodeon a little bit on a show we're going to be talking about next month. I can totally see why, on paper, this show sounds like a fun idea, and why, on paper, it would seem like a good fit for Nickelodeon. It's PBS, and Schneider wanted that wholesome PBS You Pay For channel, and it was an early example of the for kids, about kids, by kids television that Nickelodeon would lean into pretty hard over the decades. The idea of profiling kids with interesting hobbies or talents would come back from time to time, just in different formats, like a game show. PBS was already improving the formula when Nickelodeon grabbed this show. Programs like 3-2-1 Contact had a stronger sense of presentation, was edited better, and actually felt educational instead of conversational. Studio C lasted 2 years on PBS, 2 years on Nickelodeon. It basically ran its course and left without much fanfare. Its value in 2018 is mostly archival. It's neat to have footage of Rick Baker's old workshop, footage of Dizzy Gillespie, footage of Reed Roundel. I'm all for gathering up the raw footage from this show and preserving it in the Library of Congress or something. I'm glad it inspired some kids to get into videography, and Jane Adair's presence as a young female entrepreneur in the growing field of video production is very interesting. But this is just not a well-realized program. Its heart was in the right place, but it didn't know how to pull it off.
Nick, 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 Nickelodeon. Nick, 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 Nickelodeon.
Next time, Nickelodeon gets its first celebrity endorsement and tries to appeal to the jocks in the audience. Today's shout out goes to the Moving Image Research Collections at the University of South Carolina. You probably noticed their watermark in a lot of this footage. This being a show based out of South Carolina, they saw it upon themselves to preserve 2 episodes of Studio C. Their archive has a lot of interesting and rare footage relevant to South Carolina history, so if you're interested in the area, it's totally worth a browse. And hello to everybody who came here from the AV Club. Knacks was recently featured on their site, which is totally awesome, and I hope I can live up to the hype. If this show is striking your fancy, perhaps consider donating to my Patreon. Even $1 per video goes a long way in keeping the lights on and letting Knacks be the best show it can be. You can also help support the show by liking, sharing, subscribing, hitting that bell icon for notifications, or following me on Twitter, which is the easiest way to follow video progress and to get a hold of me personally. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.